Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1943 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Jennifer Jones won for her performance in The Song of Bernadette. But why did she beat fellow nominees Jean Arthur, Ingrid Bergman, Joan Fontaine, and Greer Garson? We'll explore all this and more today on And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 16th year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1943. We'll be discussing why Jennifer Jones won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today was heard on the Best Picture series a while back, talking with me about the iconic Best Picture lineup of 1939, owner of the Noir Auteur.net, member of the Hollywood Critics Association. Please welcome back to the show, Terence Johnson.
Hi.
Hi.
Thrilled to be here again.
Yes, indeed. Talking more about classic Hollywood.
Yes.
Well, before we really dive into 1943, let us talk about Best Actress as a category. Let people know your taste on this category. So my first question for you, what is your favorite Best Actress win of all time?
I was actually looking at a list I put together like many moons ago, and I was like, has it changed? And the answer is probably no.
No.
Vivienne Leigh, A Streetcar Named Desire. It's such a great bookend with her Oscar for Gone with the Wind in terms of the character, in terms of the type of performance it is, like the type of acting she's doing in that movie versus the type of acting like Brando is doing. That's such a really great, it's a great movie. It's a great, it was a great stage play. It's a great film, but I think that's the pinnacle of acting, I would say.
It is.
It's pretty great.
Yeah. From like every member of that cast, which
Yes.
is why it got all the wins and nominations.
If it was not for, you know, foolery happening with, I think Humphrey Bogart won that year, right?
Yes, for the African Queen.
Yeah, if he could have won for like Casablanca or something else earlier, that's one of the few. That's maybe the only movie where I was like, it would have deserved to win all four acting prizes. There's not too many.
Yeah.
Even some of the other films that have won three, I'm like, I don't know if I would have given it, whatever one it lost. But that movie is one where I was like, all four of them deserve to win an Oscar.
No, it's true. It's a movie that essentially invented acting.
Yeah.
So, well, good. Well, my other question, what would you say on the flip side is your most heartbreaking loss in Best Actress? Either something from the past or something you experienced in your lifetime. It can be anything.
This was hard.
Mm-hmm.
This was really hard because there's not too many where I'm like, oh my God, I'm heartbroken that this person didn't win. But I think I wrote down everybody in 2006.
Oh.
So the year Helen Mirren won, I think the reason why that, and it's not the same, and she's great in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I just look at the work everybody else, Penelope Cruz, Judi Dench, Meryl, and Kate Winslet are doing, and I'm like, I just would have preferred any of them to win, and they couldn't win because Mirren swept the whole thing, and I think that's what made it more heartbreaking, is because I was like, man, she's really great, but like, has Penelope Cruz been better? Maybe in Parallel Mothers, she's up there. Meryl is doing her thing. Judy is playing one of the worst people ever put into a movie, and Kate Winslet is like, we know her. We know Kate Winslet, rose to extreme popularity in period pieces, but like I think her being able to do sort of her modern work, it's the stuff that she just won the Emmy for Mayor of Easttown. It's kind of in that vein. So yeah, I just would have preferred anybody else. Even though I agree that Helen Mirren is very good in that movie, I just think any of those other four nominees would have been a more exciting winner.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you there. That is one lineup that I'm very much looking forward to eventually
Yeah,
covering
when you get
because
there in like
I don't, yeah,
7 years.
right, exactly. But yeah, I don't even know. Like, I feel like my winner would change with each passing year. Like, just that's a great lineup, and I almost wish it would be like what we've seen the past few years of Best Actress, where we could actually have like multiple different winners happening before the Oscars to make
Yeah,
it less of a foregone conclusion. Because yeah, I mean, Judi Dench has never been better than in Notes on a Scandal. I mean, Meryl Streep, Devil Wears Prada is such iconic work from her. Kate Winslet, like, she was on an overdue path with so many nominations up to that point. Would have preferred it to The Reader if she won for Little Children.
yeah.
So, and yeah, Penelope Cruz, again, never been better at Voltaire. So, wow, yeah, very much looking forward to that. But we have
Yeah.
to go way back in time now to talk about this year at the Oscars, 1943. The nominees were Jean Arthur for The More the Merrier, Ingrid Bergman For Whom the Bell Tolls, Joan Fontaine for The Constant Nymph, Greer Garson for Madame Curie, and Jennifer Jones for The Song of Bernadette, with the winner being Jennifer Jones. So, Terence, before we break down these performances on an individual level, curious if you had any overall thoughts on this lineup.
In terms of the different types of performances, I thought it was a really interesting group of people, interesting types of performances, interesting movies, and I think I enjoyed the variety. It's really interesting watching these movies with like 2022 eyes,
Yeah.
and because there's one movie, two of these movies I had big problems with.
Oh, yeah. We'll get to
But
it.
it was interesting, the different styles, the different types of performances, and I think in terms of like this is a very well-rounded lineup. Like there's all different types of genres, and so what at first, because when you first wrote down the list, you were like Ingrid For Whom the Bell Tolls. I was like, no, shouldn't that be Casablanca? And then I realized that she was not nominated for Casablanca, so
Yep.
I was like, oh, okay,
Mm-hmm.
interesting,
Yeah.
interesting, yeah,
For me, this lineup, yes, there is some nice differences in the types of performances and characters there are, but I also feel like this is not a very inspired lineup overall. I think we
yeah.
have some more rubber stamping here with people like Greer Garson and maybe even Joan Fontaine too, I would say, both previous Oscar winners. Ingrid Bergman is here finally in a not so great role. We do thankfully have Jean Arthur, who is my queen,
Yeah, I
that
was
I'm
gonna
very
say
excited.
our fave
Yes,
that we got to talk about.
I know.
She should have been nominated for Mrs. Smith Goes to Washington.
Right. Yes, and here we are, our one opportunity to actually dive into Jean.
Yeah,
And then with Jennifer Jones, I think is a good example of, like an actress who was groomed to be a star and really culminating with this Oscar win. But yeah, on the whole, it's not a lineup that I, I don't think people go back to this very much as like one of the best. We have a
yeah,
lot of the classic noble types of characters, which would really be all throughout the 40s. Not a surprise with, World War II happening. There was really this thirst to have like good noble people. But yeah, it's a weird one this year. So excited to break this one down. All right, well, let's jump into this individually, going in alphabetical order, starting with, of course, Jean Arthur for The More the Merrier. Oh boy, okay. So, as people know by this point, she is probably one of my favorite actresses of this era, maybe even all time. And this is her one and only Oscar nomination, even though she should have gotten
jeez,
like three or more, like three or four or five.
yeah,
But just a little on her background. She first started in silent film in the 20s, actually, and she was put in a lot of like lighter kinds of movies. But then when she took on this bigger role in Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, she started to really emerge as a more dynamic actress, and she did Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which we talked about. She was also one of the stars of You Can't Take It With You, which won Best Picture. And then, The Talk of the Town, a year before this, with Cary Grant, is a film that I love. And here she is doing another comedy kind of in that variety. She actually helped to develop the More the Merrier as a vehicle for herself, which we love that.
Yes.
And her friend, I guess, had written a story, and she really encouraged him to adapt it into a screenplay. And she got to choose her director, which is George Stevens. So yeah, this is another example of an actress really taking initiative and developing her own films. And this is about a woman named Connie, played by Jean, who is in Washington, D.C., and it's during a housing shortage. So she sublets half of her apartment to this older man named Benjamin Dingle, who's in town to essentially advise on the shortage or something. I don't know. It's kind of unclear. But then Dingle runs into this Air Force sergeant, Joe Carter, who has no place to stay. So he sublets his half, which means it's the three of them all living together. Hijinks ensue. But we have her and Joe really coming to like each other, even though she's already engaged to someone else. And guess you could say even more hijinks ensue from there. So what are your thoughts here on Jean Arthur and her only Oscar nomination?
It's so amazing that she was like, you know who I want to direct me? George Stevens, um,
Yeah.
of Oakland, California fame. I liked her performance in this movie. I think that, and this is what I mean by watching with 2022 eyes.
Mm-hmm.
I think for what she's doing, it's fun. Her exasperation at,
Yeah.
Mr. Dingle, and then her exasperation at the fact that there's another man, um,
Mm.
and the way that they meet. She's got like a mask on her face. It's so tough for me to divorce her performance though from this movie, which made me so mad
Boy.
at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think the way that the hijinks started, like I get it's very screwball, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
she tells the Air Force sergeant, "You need to get out of my house," and he's like, "Well, I need my $6 back." And the guy was like, "Oh no, well the $6 I went paid the rent, to you, so you have to." And all I was thinking was like, stab him, like call the police, something,
Yeah, do something.
anything,
Yeah.
anything to
Mm-hmm.
get them out. But I did like her madcap energy. I think in terms of the middle of the movie, in terms as she's falling in love with this guy, she's very very convincing.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that stuff. But then the ending, I was like, so she's just gonna cry for the
Yeah.
last. I was like, oh, what a sour note to end everything on.
Mm.
And so that's where it's like it's hard to divorce her performance because in terms of like 1943 screwball, it's sort of pitch perfect for that, but it's like the movie around her isn't holding up, so therefore she's getting dragged down a bit in my
Yeah.
mind, at least.
Mm. That's fair. And I will just say, if I were to just say you only get to nominate Jean Arthur for one film, I don't know if this would be the one.
Yeah, not for me.
But yeah, but I do think that she still really gives it her all here. I
Yeah,
mean, like I said, it's not my favorite of her performances, but it does have a lot of elements that I love about Jean Arthur. Just her versatility, her way of really excelling in both comedy and drama, I think, and just how fearless she can be sometimes with her image and just her facial reactions. Um, and what's interesting here is that, this is a comedy, but she's not always necessarily driving the comedy. A lot of the material she's given is, I would argue, more on the dramatic end,
it
and the
is.
more comedic parts are just like in her reacting to all the nuttiness around her. And so, yeah, it feels like a lot of the more dramatic elements are on her shoulders, and that's really the emotional core of the film. And I think she makes this character, which could be maybe to a broad audience less enjoyable compared to all the nonsense with what Dingle is doing, and she makes you really care about her, I would say, because she just has this ability to be so charming, I think,
Hmm.
and so expressive. I think you can always tell what she's thinking. Um, and I think maybe there's a version of this where that character is not as effective as it is if that's played by someone else who is maybe more guarded or more distant, or just on the opposite end of being too over the top into like the zaniness of everything. But I think she finds the right pitch. I think that's what she's always been really good at, is sort of knowing what film she's in, I suppose, even if it's
Yeah,
not great.
and that's a key skill for an actor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Understanding the movie that you're in is very,
Yes.
because some people don't.
Yeah, it's understanding the assignment, truly.
Yeah.
I mean, we see in the beginning that Charles Coburn, who's playing Dingle, is driving so many of those scenes, but she never really gets lost in the picture. She always has like either a great facial reaction or a monologue that she's delivering where she's just so locked into the character in a way that is very recognizable for me, in the sense of like, here's this woman who is kind of career focused and she likes her little routines, and then when that gets thrown out of whack, she's a little bit frazzled. She's not pleased with this situation, but she doesn't let it show too much, at least in the beginning. She still wants to be a decent person and accommodating and everything, but she still likes things a certain way, and she has this kind of screen presence where she comes across as very confident even through these early moments where, things are starting to unseat her a little bit, but then over time we see some of that start to really crack, and she becomes kind of messier, I would say. What do you think of
Oh,
her?
definitely.
What do you think of her sort of interactions with Dingle and the kind of repartee that they have together? I feel like Charles Coburn also is like kind of a divisive performance here, because either you like what he's doing or you're like, I hate this man.
I see that's the tough thing about this movie, right? I like
Yeah.
what he's doing, and I like her reactions to him. I think, because at first I was like, wait, this dude is old. Is this supposed to be her love interest? Because I did not look at the
Oh
cover
God.
of the movie, and I was like, oh Lord, what am I getting into? Um, but I liked it. The age difference, I think, is what really sort of drove that. Like she was exasperated by him, but I think in her mind, she's like, here's this older gentleman who doesn't have a home. I'm going to let him stay. And she portrays a woman who's trying to handle what life is throwing at her the best that she can.
Hmm.
Um, and then you see how, like, at some point she's going to reach a breaking point, which she does.
Oh yeah.
um, I I like the stuff that they have together, and I do like his performance. It just annoyed it. Like the second he rented out the other half, I was like, how is she gonna react to this? And she reacted like how I thought she would.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the love story aspect, I liked how they did that. Lots of strong love stories in this group
Mm.
of actresses, but
Yeah.
I I thought her reaction to the guy, like the samba, and I don't know if it was samba when they were dancing, but the dancing that they were doing, I was like, oh okay, this is so great, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Right. And we should mention that's Joel McCrea that she's bouncing off of
yes,
there. And I think they're pretty electric together, I would say. And honestly, we see just from that very first time they see each other. And even though previously to that they had no idea that they even existed in this apartment together, there's almost a
hmm
bit of a charge between them with the way they're sort of looking each other up and down and everything. And I think the film does a good job of making that relationship at least evolve in a way that feels pretty natural. Like when they're having breakfast and the two guys are teasing her and she's like looking at him like she's about to give it back to him, and she doesn't
yeah.
really know what to say, and she's like, you look messy.
Yeah,
I think they're pretty cute together, not gonna lie.
yeah. I was rooting
um
for them. I was,
yeah.
which is why I say the ending soured me because I did not like the tone of how that happened.
Yeah, we'll get to it.
Yeah.
But just looking at things before that ending, I think the moment where he gives her the traveling bag and she's so touched by this sort of gesture and she gets caught up in how kind this guy is and is sort of admiring
Uh,
this bag. But then she remembers her fiance and it sort of like jolts her back into reality. I think that's a really good scene for her. And it's a kind of scene that we get through a lot of the rest of the movie of her really having to decide what she wants to do, the classic sort of female lead rom-com heroine sort of situation.
mm-hmm.
Like, does she want to continue on this more sensible route of what she was doing before and, you know, just go along with this bureaucrat who she doesn't really have that much chemistry with? Or does she follow this new path with this guy, Joe, and just sort of follow her impulses?
I loved that scene. I love that scene because it was like there's so much character detail that you get before it's like he feels bad because of the situation that he's put her in. He also likes her, so he's like, I'm going to do this nice thing
Yeah.
for her, and like she feels very touched by the gesture. And it like I said, it is complicated because she's got a fiance, but you find out that they've been engaged for 2 years. So she's like, here's this man who said, you know, he wants to marry me, and 2 years later we have not gotten married, and here's this guy who's known me for like a week, and he's giving me a gift to take on my honeymoon with this other guy who has not put who has not married me yet. So
Right.
she definitely plays like the complications of that scene. I did love that. That was the moment where I was like, okay, I screw this other guy. Like this is clearly the guy for her.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's the part where, you know, Dingle is reading
Ugh,
her diary, and Joe is technically with him and sort of like, I don't know if we should do that, but isn't like totally putting up a fight about it.
yeah.
Um, but she just assumes that Joe is just as bad as Dingle in this situation. She's really confronting the both of them. And what I really like about that scene, which is back in their apartment, is the way that she delivers that monologue. I don't know if you noticed this, but she's actually stumbling over her words a little bit. And it feels so much more natural because it's like this is a woman who is frazzled and she doesn't know what's going to come out of her mouth next. And I've
Yeah.
talked before about how sometimes we have performances, especially in classic Hollywood, where some of the bigger monologues can feel very much like rehearsed speeches. I
Hmm.
mentioned that a few times with some of Norma Shearer's performances, but just saying. But
Yeah.
here it feels like someone really having a real emotional moment. That's it. That's pretty raw. So
Oh yeah. And I think this
yeah,
movie and Gene do such a great job of making you feel for this woman. Like even as
yeah,
the zany hijinks ensue, you're like you would feel the exact same way, especially if you knew what you'd been writing in your diary about this new guy who's in your
yeah.
house, who you don't want to be there, but who you find yourself attracted to. And now this old man has told him what you said.
Mm-hmm.
I would flip
Mm-hmm.
out too.
Yeah, it's perfectly justified.
Yes.
Um, and I mean, speaking more just to their chemistry, I also wanted to just highlight the scene more towards the end where they're walking home from, I guess, the restaurant or something, and they're on the steps finally, and she's talking about her engagement and the wedding and everything, and he's just looking at her so passionately, and he starts like kissing her on the neck,
Hmm.
and she's really getting like hot and bothered here.
Yes.
And let me tell you, the way that that whole scene is filmed is very steamy, and she really just sells how, for lack of a better word, just how turned on she is, and how much she should definitely be with this guy. And then, you know, we have the scene of them really confessing their love for each other in their little separate beds, which really sort of feels like a montage or a montage, an homage to It Happened One Night.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love them
I
together.
That scene of them walking is so good because it starts
Mm,
with her. It's it's like a date. They haven't had a
yeah,
date. They've just been living together under the same roof. They've had these moments, but getting on each other's nerves, but then being nice to each other. And this is the first time like we get into his romantic history. right? She's like, oh, well, what about this girl? So what? Who
That's
was before
right.
her? And you could see in her mind, she's like, I also felt like she's trying to catalog what she needs to live up to or
Mm,
surpass in a way. You don't ask 750 million questions of somebody about who they've dated if you're not like, what am I dealing with here, and who am I gonna have to be in your mind to be the person that you want? And
yeah.
she's definitely trying to. That was definitely a very, very sexy moment for a 1943 movie.
Yeah. To me, it felt pretty modern, at
Oh,
least in that
definitely.
moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then, we get the whole plot line of like their neighbor thinking that Joe is a Japanese spy, which he says like as a joke at one point, but he takes it literally. So he's brought in by the FBI in this very sort of contrived way. But I will say I love all her sort of sour expressions in the room where they're being questioned, and the way she's trying as much as possible to just avoid revealing the truth of this whole situation that they're in.
Yeah.
And then we later have Dingle deciding that just the best way to avoid a scandal is by arranging for the two of them to get married in South Carolina, and it becomes kind of convoluted. And then like getting an annulment after that. I mean, not my favorite
Mm.
development. I feel like again it feels kind of contrived to give it more stakes in a way that I don't know if is particularly needed.
Yeah, the stuff in the FBI office is great, as especially the second her fiance walks in and
Yes.
she like immediately covers her. She's like, "Oh God." She's trying to like make herself, if she could be like Alex Mack and turn into a puddle and like slip under the door, she would have.
Yeah.
But she could. She just had to, she was trying to sit there as quietly as possible. That was some really, really great acting. And then sort of once it's, revealed. And then when they get into the hallway and they're like still going at it, and Dingle is like, oh, but you guys we gotta be quiet because, all of our reputations are still on the line. I think the marriage it was contrived.
Mm,
And I don't think it needed to be that way. It just needed like they could have just gotten together. Like she breaks up with this her fiance because she's just not feeling him and she's sad. And then you have a moment where the two of them realize that it was the two of them all along, and they get together. And it didn't need to be a reporter gonna talk about the scandal
right.
and all. Yeah, it definitely got complicated.
It, yeah. I feel like it could be simplified, and it would
Yeah,
be. I just feel like it doesn't need this sort of continued heightening of tension because there's already the tension.
yeah,
So I don't know, but yeah, we get these last few scenes where I mean, truly, like you said, like her last few scenes are her either just wailing openly or trying to speak while also crying.
yeah. And it does her a disservice. Like, and we've seen a very good Jean Arthur. Mrs. Smith Goes to Washington. She should have been nominated for that. I
Yeah,
I, I just will never
I know,
understand
I know.
having watched that movie. Um, it just is such a weird note to end a screwball rom-com on, right? Like if
Yeah,
she would have started the crying and then sort of ended it at some point, it just it's like it's such a weird like she's performing it, you know.
she's going for it.
She's going for it, but it's like why?
Mm,
Because now
yeah,
it's like I'm like, dang, I can't even get into the wonderful fantasy about like the serendipitous nature of running into the guy that you're going to spend the rest of your life with because you're just crying.
mm,
And so now I'm sad.
yeah. It doesn't
Yeah,
feel
it's
like a
what a
good
weird note.
resolution.
What a
Yeah,
weird note to end a movie on. Yeah.
I would agree. Yeah, but this I think is still another great performance from her. I think it's not just the surface level stuff that she's great at, like the comedy and the versatility, but she does actually chart a pretty interesting journey for the character where she's gotten so stuck in this routine and she hasn't really been questioned about it, or no one's really questioned her about it, and now she's having to figure out what she really wants. So I think, ending aside, that it's an interesting character and I approve. What a surprise. But
Yeah.
let's just read a quick review from the New York Times that reviewed the More the Merrier. They said, as the sorely put upon little lady, Miss Arthur plays with spirit and with charm. Her indignations have the quality of those of a bantam hen, and her nervous submission to the advances of Mr. McCrae are a tickling delight.
Oh God.
So, high praise for Miss Jean Arthur.
Yeah.
But interestingly worded. Any other thoughts on Jean Arthur before we move on?
I can't believe this is her only nomination, but we've said that enough. But I just cannot.
It's disgusting.
That.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think maybe we'll get into this a little later too, but she did have a bit of a reputation of being quote unquote uncooperative.
Oh God.
Which means I'm a woman who knows what I want.
Yeah. Just in the same era as Betty and Catherine and
yeah,
and Joan. Like, wow, what a
yes.
Okay.
I know, but she was also like kind of shy at times, and there was just a little bit of a fraught dynamic sometimes on set. But again, like the reputation that she garnered is just such a double standard, because I imagine that if this was a male actor, they would get like many more nominations than this. So I don't know. It just bums me out when I read about behind the scenes of how the industry reacted to her. So I guess I'm not wholly surprised that this is her only nomination, but I guess glad that she was nominated at all.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, let's move on to someone who was nominated a whole bunch. Ingrid Bergman for Whom the Bell Tolls. Okay, so this is, I guess you could say, this week's big introduction to an actress that we'll be talking a whole lot about in the years to come. Ingrid Bergman, 3-time Oscar winner, 7-time nominee. We're going to be talking about her 4 times just from the 40s. So we're going to have to get used to Ingrid Bergman, folks. I mean, I love her, but just saying, we'll be talking about her a lot. But before For Whom the Bell Tolls, she was a Swedish actress. She starred in a number of Swedish films and German films, and then here she comes to Hollywood and this film Intermezzo in 1939, which really made people stand up and be like, who is this actress? And she was quickly put in a lot of films, including Casablanca and For Whom the Bell Tolls here, which is, of course, an adaptation of a Hemingway novel. And I guess Hemingway himself wanted her to play this part after he saw her in Intermezzo. So interesting there.
And then they gave the part to somebody else, and that girl didn't work. And then they went back for it.
Yes. Vera Zorina was apparently cast for the role, but I guess the way that they transformed her and her hair and her whole look, it wasn't working, according to Paramount, and they really wanted someone with a little more glamour. So that's where Ingrid Bergman came in. But this film is very long, and it is about, it's about a guy named Robert Jordan, played by Gary Cooper, who is fighting with the brigades in the Spanish Civil War, and he has to detonate a bridge to prevent the fascists from attacking. And he meets a colorful group of characters in this local guerrilla fighters group, including Maria, who Ingrid Bergman plays. She's a 19-year-old woman who saw her family killed by fascists, and this leads eventually to Robert and Maria falling in love with each other, and it's against the backdrop of war, so very romantic and epic and sweeping and all that. So this is another performance here that I would count in my growing list of Best Actress nominees that I refer to as What If There Was a Wife? She's not playing a wife necessarily, but she is the love interest for the main character, and more or less defined by that relationship and the love that they have with each other. And this film isn't really about her, so yeah. Curious your thoughts on Ingrid here in her first nomination, and her look and her place in the story, whether she should be lead or supporting, wherever you want to start.
Whether she should be lead or supporting is a very good,
Hmm.
interesting place to start
Yeah.
because what is that one? The woman who Katina, right?
Yeah.
Katina, who
Hmm.
played Pilar, feels more lead to me.
Yes.
She also snatched the movie out from under everybody, but we're not here to talk about her.
She sure did.
I watched this movie first before I watched any of the other ones, and I was like, are the supporting actresses about to steal the movie from everybody? Because poor Ingrid
Hmm.
Bergman.
I
Um,
know.
what I wrote, I was jotting down notes as I was watching these movies, and I was like, the haircut makes the movie,
Hmm.
right? Like so much
Hmm.
of our initial, I do think Ingrid Bergman is doing a good job in this part, but so much of our initial like presence to her, like her presence is so much about her hair. Like she cannot stop touching her hair.
Yep.
The first half hour of this movie, you know, and then there's
Hmm.
two more. God, this movie was very long.
There's an intermission.
Yes, which I was very thankful for.
Yes,
um,
same. Did not
but yeah,
watch this all in one bite, by the way.
it was.
Broke this one up. Yep.
This one needs to be broken up because the movie is. It's a lot of sitting and talking, and then they like move somewhere and they sit and talk for the first hour 45, and then you get that intermission, and then
Yep.
the second half is action.
Yeah.
And so action and like super romance. So I think that initially I was just annoyed because I was like, she keeps touching her hair. Like, we get it. You cut your hair. This woman has short hair. That's the whole thing in the book. It was the reason why, the first actress didn't work out. And so I was like, is she going to be able to overcome this tick that she has? And I do
Mhm.
think that she does. Um, but it's just weird to have this in a year that you also give Casablanca.
Yep. Yep.
So that's just a hard thing. But she's fine in this, but in the beginning, I was like, put your hand down, stop touching your hair. Like we understand that she has short
We get
hair.
it.
It's like a whole. It was just like a whole thing. And then she's supposed to be 19, and I'm like, I don't. This is going to be an
Mm.
issue I have with another one of these nominees. Um,
Oh, yeah. That's, yeah.
a teenager, like I don't. She didn't have to be that
Multiple grown women here playing teenagers.
young. Yes.
Hmm.
Um, so like I think it was fine, but yeah, in the beginning, I think once she got to reveal her character's backstory, that's when I really started to jive with the performance, and I could be like, oh, here's a woman who is attaching herself to like this heroic guy. She's had such an awful experience, and here's a guy who's trying to do those awful people harm, and
Hmm.
so he's like a hero in her eyes, and it doesn't help that he also looks like Gary Cooper,
Right.
and I believe the romance. So that all of that stuff I believe. But yeah, in the beginning I was like, girl, just put your hands to your sides. Stop touching your hair, please.
Yeah. Definitely a tick. Um, so I find this movie to be interminable.
It's bad.
Um, it's so drawn out and very sluggishly paced. Yeah, I mean, it's close to 3 hours for the record, and I feel all 3 of those hours. There's really no excuse for making this as long as it is. I just want to get that off my chest real quick. Um,
And you are 100% right.
yeah. Well, I had seen this before because I had to watch this for the Best Picture series, so this was another 3 hours of my life
Oh God.
rewatching it. But I mean, honestly, I probably tuned out a lot of this film on this rewatch that didn't involve Ingrid Bergman because it's like I don't know how relevant it's going to be here. But speaking to the performance, I can't say that it's all that impressive to me, honestly. A lot of what she's given to do is pretty beneath her skills as an actress.
Yes.
She gets a few moments here and there where she really does pop, like as you were saying, when she gets to talk about her background, but it's not really enough for me to make a super compelling character here. And something we've talked about a lot on this show is the idea of actors really elevating the material that they're given, and I think she does okay with that, but I don't know if it fully goes beyond okay for me. I mean, outside of those monologue scenes she has, a lot of what she's doing is smiling at
Mm-hmm.
Robert or looking concerned whenever there's trouble. And I don't think she really personally really transforms into the character very much. And we have a number of these group scenes here where they're all in a cave and it's just like her listening to other people talk. And there's nothing she's doing that really indicates that much of an internal life for me. I mean, it's good that she's not like standing out too much in those scenes and they're not about her, but there's nothing there for me. Even as I'm watching these scenes play out that have, Robert and one of the characters talking, and I'm just actually trying to fixate on her in the background and what she's doing,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really feeling much. But
Yeah,
yeah,
there's not, go with me on this analogy.
okay.
It feels like how Scarlett Johansson thought about acting before she went to Broadway and won her Tony.
Oh, wow. Okay. Go
So
on.
by that I mean like Ingrid Bergman is a great actress, but like
Yes.
when Scarlett Johansson went and did that whole Broadway thing, it was like she was like, "Oh, I learned about like how important my entire body is to the performance."
Mm,
Right? Because you don't necessarily get that when you're on screen. And I think the thing with Ingrid in this movie, it's like she's in these scenes to be in these scenes and to be like this luminous creature that's
right.
there. But when they're talking mess about her, it's like it's not even phasing her, or like it doesn't feel like she's lived in this cave with these people. It just feels like she is there in this
Exactly.
cave with these people. And so like we said, it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. Like, it's not bad. I would not call
Yeah,
it
it's not
bad, even though
bad.
yeah, feels like I've been kind of negative at this point, but I don't think this is like, wow, what an awful performance Ingrid is turning in here. But at the same time, yeah, don't know if she's that convincing as a 19-year-old. The accent is
Everywhere.
all over the place,
Yes.
even though she's supposed to be playing someone from Spain. And yeah, there's just not a lot of variation in the performance from scene to scene just because of how simple the character is. And it doesn't really allow her to do much stretching overall. So, unfortunately, this is not a great start to my Bergman watching here. I'm sure I will be much more positive in the weeks to
Oh,
come.
it'll get better.
Yeah, I mean, as quickly as next week with Gaslight. you
Yeah,
know.
I think because what would you say her arc was in this movie?
Mm. Her arc, I think, is just learning to trust this man and fall in love with him, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's like comparing her to like looking at her in terms of like the other nominees.
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh, I was like, oh, you got in this because it was a blockbuster
Mm-hmm.
of the year and a Best Picture nominee, and you were the actress who had a lot of fame surrounding her getting the part,
Right.
and that is how you, because yeah, what Lord, it's interesting to go back and look at some of like what people's first, if I want to compare it to another modern, like Jennifer Lawrence, it's like, oh, what was her first
Mm.
nomination? Oh, Winter's Bone. Right, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh,
Right.
Ingrid Bergman has an Oscar. What was her first nomination? This, like,
Not
what a
Casablanca?
yeah, what a strange thing. But yeah, she's fine, and it just I just was
She's
not.
fine.
The only time I was really moved was when she was talking about what happened in her past, and I was like, okay, I get this woman.
Yeah.
Um,
Her big monologue where she talks about how, like, the fascists shot her family and she had to watch it all happen. That's a moment where it feels like finally she's doing something real. And
yeah,
it could have been kind of melodramatic, but the way she performs it is really her sort of almost reliving this experience as she's speaking, and she's sort of stopping and starting, and it's not always like this rehearsed speech like I was talking about before. Um, so, and we see she's just like staring with so much intensity. But then in the same scene, it ends with them kissing for the first time, and doesn't
yeah.
she say something like, "Where do the noses go?" Like, I don't know if she really makes that line work because it's kind of clunky, but at least we get a hint of some actual personality.
Hmm.
Just saying. I mean, I will just say in terms of positives, the camera really does just love her. and
Yes.
she's good at acting just with her face. We get a lot of very extreme close-ups of her face where her
Hmm.
face is just filling the entire screen, and she does sell those emotions pretty well. And obviously there's a lot of the tussling with the hair, which I was like, okay, we get it at first, but then you're right, it happens like 5 or 6 times, and I'm just like, okay, we get it. That's your one other personality trait.
Yeah.
You have certain feelings about your hair being short. I get it. Um, but also, I do think that her and Gary Cooper do have some pretty decent chemistry together. Although this is one of those performances from Gary Cooper where he's really sleepwalking. I don't know how you felt about this
He was
performance, but
he was too stoic. He was
yeah,
too stoic. I was like, are you gonna give me anything
yeah,
in the way of modulation? Like,
yeah.
and
It's
anything, please, because I'm gonna be here for another 2.5 hours.
yeah.
Like something.
It's very go on, girl, give us nothing. Like,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Which
Like
is
I
why,
get in.
you
Mhm.
know, Katina, I think Paxanow,
Yes, yes, yes. Yep.
why she walks away with this movie, because I was like, oh, here's a jolt of energy every time she's on screen. She's a
Right.
good scene partner to everybody. I think the scenes that involve her with like Ingrid, I think are pretty good.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Hmm.
definitely a mother daughter vibe there. But yeah, Gary, man,
Mm.
any kind of energy would have been welcome.
Yeah, because this is the guy we're supposed to be following for almost 3 hours, and he does not contribute to much of anything, to be honest.
Yeah.
But so let's think. I mean, after the intermission, we have another monologue from her where she's opening up about her past, and again, she looks very shell shocked, and she's talking about getting her hair cut and seeing, I think, her best friend die, and there's this interesting element here where she seems almost shocked that Robert still loves her even after admitting all this stuff that she's been through with
Hmm.
being raped by these terrible men and being brutalized. And to me, the way I sort of read that scene is that she feels like she's been corrupted essentially, and she
Yes.
expects a guy like Robert to want this young woman who is more virginal and pure, but he still wants her as she is. So I think she does a pretty decent job with exploring that aspect here.
Yeah, I'd agree. That those are
Mm,
the most affecting moments of the story.
yeah.
And I guess maybe her arc is, realizing that she's not bad.
Yeah. Like she hasn't become worthless because of
Yeah,
all
she's
this.
looking worthless.
Right. But otherwise, the rest of the film is just more concerned looks and a
Mm.
few moments where she like talks about wanting to take care of him, that she'll like wash him and feed him whenever he needs it, and a lot of sort of male fantasy stuff. But cutting back to her, and by the end she's sort of staying safe while he's out fighting the fascists, and she's just like praying that he'll be all right, and eventually
Hmm.
he's not all right, and we get more of the close-ups, and really delivering with the tears, and I think she's pretty affecting in these final few moments that they have together.
Yes,
Yeah.
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like lots of high drama by the end here, but I think she does ground it in a way that these emotions do feel real, I would say. But
Yeah, I wish the first half, or maybe not, like first three-quarters of this movie was just tighter, because
yeah,
then I think the melodrama of the ending and her work would have played better. You
yeah,
know, the movie is trying to lull you to sleep, and then it's like, oh wait, this is a movie about a war. Here's all the
yeah,
war stuff.
right.
Um, and she's good in those scenes, but yeah, by then I was like, okay, I'm just ready to cut this off.
Hmm. Yeah, well, that's about all I have on Ingrid, unfortunately.
Yeah.
This review from the New York Times I found interesting and kind of funny. They said Gary Cooper as Robert Jordan and Ingrid Bergman as Maria are fine, though limited in their opportunities. Miss Bergman is perhaps a shade too gay. which I just loved reading out of context.
Yeah,
But I
because
also,
that could mean so many things.
yes, I wish she was a shade too gay in this. Maybe it would be something interesting to talk about.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think the sense from that I got is that there was a feeling that she brought too much of that sort of smiley luminous quality to it that was like a little overplayed, which I can understand. But yeah,
Yeah, I think in a remade version of this, you know, she'd be a little rougher.
definitely.
She was sort of, classic Hollywood rough, which
Right.
meant that
Like rough while still having makeup on.
yeah, like she didn't put on all the makeup. She just put on like three-quarters of
Yes.
her
How
usual
brave.
routine. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, let's move on to Joan Fontaine in The Constant Nymph.
Jeez.
So, all right. Well, this was her third and final nomination. This is the only one where she was not directed by Alfred Hitchcock. She was already an Oscar winner by this point for Suspicion. Her first nomination was for Rebecca, which I personally believe she should have won for. But here she is, just one last time with The Constant Nymph. And she got this part in a rather interesting way. This is a fascinating backstory here. The director, Edmund Goulding, had met with Joan's husband at a restaurant, and they were discussing how he was having trouble finding an actress to play the lead in this film. And Joan Fontaine was there, and I guess she was like wearing pigtails or something, and she didn't have makeup on. And she was like, "Well, what about me?" And Edmund Goulding was like, who are you?" and she said, "It's Joan Fontaine." And he was like so startled by this and just realized, "Oh, it's got to be you. It's got to be Joan." So that's kind of funny. But this was adapted from a book and a play, and the premise is interesting. It's about a composer named Louis Dodd, who's played by Charles Boyer, who has a friend and a mentor who he's known for a long time, who he decides to visit when he's developing this new symphony. And this mentor happens to have four daughters who Louis had known since they were younger, like babies. And there's one named Tessa, who Joan plays, who really has a crush on him and has had these feelings for a long time. She's about 14 years old now, I believe. And so she tries to be with him again, and he seems to actually have a connection with her, but he decides to marry this other woman, Florence, who he doesn't really have that much in common with, but is definitely more age appropriate, I would say.
Yes.
And the story is about Tessa, I guess, sort of coming of age and dealing with these strong feelings that she has for Louis and what it does to this relationship. Fair to say, if this came out today, Twitter would be having a field day with this,
Yeah,
with the way
absolutely.
that like they go about like age gaps and morality and stuff of this nature. So, what do you think of Joan Fontaine? Just first of all, actually, I want to know, isolated from this performance, what your thoughts on her, and then what you think of her in this very different kind of role.
Um, I love her in her Hitchcock movies. I didn't realize
Mm-hmm.
she was nominated for Rebecca, um,
Yep.
which is great because she's excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how you know she's excellent? I want everybody
How's
to go watch the Netflix version, uh,
that?
so you know what it takes to sell that story.
Exactly.
um, in many respects.
Mm-hmm.
I my first note that I wrote here is like, why do I always envision her as like a woman? I envision her
Hmm.
as a woman, right? Like
Right.
she's a younger bride, but she's still a woman when she gets married to Laurence Olivier and Rebecca. And
Mm-hmm.
in Suspicion, she's playing a woman who's dealing with this husband who she thinks may or may not be trying to murder her.
Yeah.
Like there's a gravitas to that. So it is just wild then to see this. And at first I was like, oh, who is she playing? I was like, maybe she's playing like an older version of the teenager. But no, she was playing
The
the
teenager. Yep.
teenager.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What the hell is going on? Um, it's so in a transformative respect, do I think she looks like a teenager? No, but in terms of like her performance in capturing a teenager like that, I actually think she does a pretty good job. Um, it's very Silver Linings Playbook,
Mm.
big Jennifer Lawrence energy in terms of like here is a teenager slash young woman, or she's a teenager for most the entire movie. I think is she
Yeah,
19?
yeah, yeah.
So teenager
Mm-hmm.
who is obsessed and desperate for a man's love to like a weird detriment to
Yeah.
her. Um, Even when she's not trying to be, she is. Um, and I think Joan definitely embodied that character. I do think it's a good performance. I will say that.
Mm-hmm.
The plot is reprehensible.
Yeah, fair.
Um, the plot is just reprehensible. It's like, and I was like, I know this is not a love story about a teenager and this old man who knew her father.
Yeah.
And then it's like, and then she's got, a condition, so she
Yes.
got to play that.
Mm-hmm.
She got to do a lot in this movie, and like,
She sure did.
even even though I think this movie is dreadful, from a
Mm.
plot standpoint, I do think that Joan is actually very good in this part. Um, but yeah, it just is, and Alexa Smith, who my Sondheim fans will know from Follies, it was so great to see this movie and see her in it.
Mm.
And I saw this one second, so I was like, damn, the supporting actresses are really coming hard in these movies.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, like Joan, she is good in this, but I'm just like, I just saw her play a woman twice and win an Oscar,
Mm.
and now she's playing the teenager. Like what?
Yeah.
She did embody the part, but like there was always that split in my mind. It was like, okay, well here I am watching, she was probably what, like 27, 28
Yeah. Mid
when she
20s.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not like
Mm-hmm.
she was old, but yeah, I still can't get over the fact that she's in the part. But she did embody the character, and that's what we ask
Mm.
our actors to do.
Yeah. It's
So
true.
yeah,
Yeah. It is weird that this is her final nomination because it almost feels like this should be her first.
yeah, this is definitely like a first.
Right. So yeah, it's a weird backwards feeling where it's like somehow also like I'm looking at like I'm gonna invoke Norma Shearer again. Like her second to last nomination was playing Juliet in Romeo and Juliet.
Oh God.
And it's like, okay, you are 36 playing a teenager, but that's a choice. Anyway, um, I have a feeling that this is a performance that is quite divisive, where you either
Mm,
buy into the idea of her being a 14-year-old girl or you just don't. And that success or failure of the performance just really maybe comes down to that.
did
For
you?
me personally, I did actually, which is quite
Yeah.
surprising to me because usually when we have adults playing teenagers, I just have a hard time even believing what I'm seeing. But she really surprised me here. She really did. This is so different from the performances that she was giving in the Hitchcock movies, where she's so much more tightly wound in those films.
Yeah.
Here, it's like she's loose, she's immature, she's having fun. She has like the pigtails, and this might make me sound kind of dumb, but like at first I didn't even realize it was Joan when we're first introduced to her.
Neither did I, which I think is
Yeah.
it's a testament to her work.
Yeah, I was just like Edmund Golding where like I was fooled. Like I didn't know who this person was and I'm like, is that Joan? But yeah, I was so used to sort of seeing her as this prim kind of actress, like a woman, like you said.
Yeah.
Um, do I think she's totally believable as a 14-year-old? Maybe not. She definitely reads older, but honestly, for me, it's not that much older. Like, if you were to say, oh, this is a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old, I would have been like, yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds about right. Looks right. She's like I said, she's about mid 20s playing this, so yeah, And honestly, I think one of the reasons I didn't really have as much of a problem with that, just her being 14, is the age isn't really brought up that much, which I think is why it was easier for me to just think of her as a teenager, maybe an older teenager, but still
Hmm.
just a teenager who was in love with her father's friend. And yes, there's the age gap there, and there's a kind of not so great power dynamic, but
Mm.
I at least appreciate for me that the film, maybe it's just because of the way I watched it focusing on her so much, that it really felt like it was more about her own journey and sort of figuring out this her very complicated feelings rather than treating this like it's a romance for the ages. At least that's not how I saw this. Maybe I'm wrong, but
Yeah,
we
I do
see
think they did it. I think they do a strong job of
mm,
like showing, I think focusing on the women.
yeah.
Even though the guy, he does get a good amount of screen time. So it's not like he's not in the story, but like
No, he's a
fo
co-lead. Yeah.
focusing on her intense delusional
Right.
love for
Yeah.
this man, and then putting her in the orbit of the wife and how they interact.
Mm,
I think that Joan was able to get to play something more interesting than if it was just the two of them. I think the movie rightly I think Joan does get to play like that this girl is growing up, right? Like
right.
she
Right.
makes
Exactly.
she gets to make active decisions even though she's still delusional, right?
Hmm.
She gets to make active decisions about how she's going to go about this thing and when to pull back and how to move and what her character's motivations are that I think really, you know, make this not feel as disgusting as it could be.
Right.
Because it
Yeah.
is, I just was like, the stuff, I was like, come on, what? Like, what? Wait a minute.
It's such a bizarre premise. It
What a
really
what a
is.
weird premise.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
But no,
she's good.
but yeah, I mean, like we see later on where he tries to kiss her, and she pulls away, where it's like she doesn't want to cross that line, and we see how like I feel like she's probably as interested in getting him to a better place in his creative endeavors as a composer as much as she
Hmm.
is just in him as a person. So I feel like, yes, this premise is icky. And I think Charles Boyer has a kind of unpleasant energy here that might make me feel even worse about it. But I was surprised that it did actually work for me by the end in terms of what she was doing. So
Yeah,
it's a very
I
mixed emotions watching
having,
this.
slept on this for a couple of days
Uh huh.
and looking at it just from like her perspective, I do think she did a really great job.
Yeah.
Um, she gets to play all the beats, and I think the movie smartly has that character. It was good to see that she got to play the moment of being like, I love him, but I respect you as the wife, and I would never try and do this and like how complicated that is for her. I think that's a really, really smart scene, and I think a really, really great moment for Joan to get to play. Um,
Mm.
and I think her experience as an Academy Award winning actor really helped her nail that and sell that.
Yeah.
Where it's like,
Hmm.
yeah, like I've loved him my whole life, like it was puppy love, and maybe now it's real love, but like I also am not. I don't want to be a bad person, so I'm not going
Right.
to do this.
Right.
And
Which
like,
feels like a very mature thing
yes,
that
far
it
more
is.
mature
Feels like. Right.
than the movie is ultimately that the movie
Yeah.
sometimes tries to portray her as. But yeah, that was great. I'm coming around to this the more I talk about it. She was very good in this
Oh,
movie,
wow. I love
even
that.
even though, well, because
I'm
I'm
like,
like,
I'm not, it's not like I'm trying to persuade you to be like,
yeah,
this is the correct take, but I do
well,
feel like she rises above the weird material here.
yeah, I think because once you really rationalize being like, all right, this is like a grown woman playing a
Yeah.
teenager.
Yeah.
Once you put that to the side, you can start to appreciate what she's doing. And unlike, the more the merrier, I think the way she gets to end her character it feels like a complete performance.
Yeah, feels
Like
like a real journey.
Jean
Yeah.
got the screwball, and she got the drama, but then she, just cried for the last 10 minutes, which I was like, it's sort of a sour note to leave on. And even though this has a dramatic ending,
Yeah.
it felt earned. Um, and so, yeah, she did a pretty good job, I have to say.
Yeah, definitely. I think the ending is really where she ends. She ends the film the strongest of any part in the film,
Oh
and
yeah.
like we have the incident where she sends flowers to
Uh,
Florence under the guise of them being from Lewis, even though he's like never done that before a day in his life. And I actually think this is a good part of the film for her in terms of really reflecting that sort of childlike way of thinking, where it's
hmm
like you have this big plan and you're going to make this grand gesture and you have just the best of intentions, but then it does blow up in your face. And
Yeah.
she really has that look of just like sheer disappointment and is like mortified in this situation that she would pull off this stunt which went so horribly and has really caused a huge rift in the relationship between the two, Lewis and Florence. And then, that leads into another good scene where she's just in tears and she's admitting that she's kind of disturbed by Lewis, but that
hmm
she had promised herself to him so long ago and how it's really just consuming her. And
Oof.
again, a lot of this feels so childlike in the way she's expressing herself, and that feeling that you have when you're a teenager where everything feels like the end of the world.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think it's similar with the confrontation scene that is with her and Florence, where Florence is just furious with her and tells her that like she can't go to the concert because she might cause a scene, because like you sort of talked about earlier on, we have this recurring theme of her having these fainting spells. um, and I think Joan is really, really good in this scene in terms of modulating that scene and choosing when to go small and when to go big. And I also wrote down this other line, how she just sort of offhandedly tosses it off, where she's like, "Yes, I do know about love," in this way that just like really infuriates Florence. Yeah, just
Yeah.
really well done.
I know that was a beautiful scene, and I know we're talking about Joan, but I think Alexis's anger
Mm,
and like anger at this girl for liking her man, and then being angry at herself for letting the fact that this girl likes her man wind her up is such a good thing for Joan to then play off of, because you
yes.
can see it's like she's trying to be mature and she's trying to tell this woman things and she's trying to be honest, but like everything she seems to say is like backfiring in her face.
You're right.
It's like she's like, what do I need to do? Like I thought I was being nice in setting up this whole thing about getting her flowers, and that was my way of apologizing, and now it's this whole big situation, and what am I going to do? And uh, this woman hates me, and like how do I make it up to you? But like I really like she gets to play all of that. It's a really great scene. Also, what a great scene was is when after she's snuck back home with her sister,
Hmm.
uh, and he's playing the piece that her
Mm,
father wrote,
yes.
and it's raggedy, right?
Yeah,
And she
it's just a
comes
bunch of noise.
and she comes in the next day and is like, that was raggedy. Like, where is the this and the this and the this? And then you can see, even though you've thought of her as like this tomboy who was just in the background and who was just, lusting after this older guy and having this crush on him for forever, it's like, oh no, like there's like something interesting there. She calls herself, stupid and doesn't have any talent. And then she's the person that actually inspires the piece of music to be good. So I liked getting to see her play that.
Yeah, it is. It's again part of that more maturity. I
Yeah.
will say, in that respect, watching that scene at first of her really sort of suggesting that he doesn't have feeling in his music if I'm being honest, some of the stuff feels a little too mature compared to what a 14-year-old might be thinking about,
Yeah,
which is why I just imagine her as like a more mature, like 18-year-old maybe, instead of someone who's just out of puberty. Like
yeah,
some of these concepts about like finding meaning and depth in music feels a little advanced. I don't know, but a little writerly inserting into the film. But yeah, I mean, I
definitely.
think she pulls it off pretty well. Yeah, especially when she's confronting him about it and talking about how his music is all bangity bang and stuff like that.
Which it
Um,
was.
it was. She had a point. So yeah, I mean, despite our both of our reservations with what this strange plot is,
Yeah.
I think this is a perfect example of someone really taking this material and elevating it to something really quite profound by the end. Like, I was
Hmm.
surprised by the final few scenes that she had, that I was kind of moved by this performance in a way. And it helps that it's so dramatic by the end and kind of operatic with the music from the symphony playing over what she's going through. But still, I was like, okay, Joan, look at you. You pulled it off.
Yeah.
So, the New York Times said about this performance, for Joan Fontaine, the role of Tessa is another superb achievement. As the delicate little girl served from Dodd by, severed from Dodd by the years between them, she wrings from the part all its humor and its pathos, which I agree with.
I agree too.
Yes. Anything else on Joan?
No, I think we covered it.
Yeah. A good final nomination for Joan Fontaine. I'll say that.
I would agree.
Yeah. I actually, when I look back at the three performances that she's been nominated for, I think the one that she won for is her weakest.
Yeah, and even though I like her in Suspicion, I agree.
Yeah, it's just funny how that works out
Yeah,
sometimes. You rarely win for your best work. Um,
that that is true.
yeah, yeah. All right, well, let's move on to our final losing nominee, Greer
Hmm.
Garson for Madame Curie. All right, so here we come to the third Oscar nomination in a row for Greer Garson, and the fourth in 5 years. So we're still in the middle of whatever you want to call this, the Greer Renaissance, I guess. She gets two more nominations the next 2 years after this, and then another one down the line. And this is another example of a performance where she is playing a very noble person. She did this with Blossoms in the Dust a few years before this. And of course, as we covered on the show last episode, she's the reigning Oscar winner here for Mrs. Miniver. And this is her returning to playing a real person like she did in Blossoms in the Dust. She's playing Marie Curie, who was the physicist who discovered radium, and she won a Nobel Prize for her studies in radioactivity. And this is a biopic about her life. Not exactly cradle to grave, but we start with her as a student in Paris, and she meets Pierre Curie, who is a fellow scientist, and they develop a connection, and that becomes a marriage, and they become a family. But the story is mainly about her discovering radium and just the painstaking steps that it took to prove her discovery. And before we talk about this performance, I also wanted to note that this story was first developed as a project for Irene Dunn, but they just couldn't crack the story, I guess. And eventually, Greta Garbo was expected to take it on, but that fell through. She was like, I don't want to act anymore. And finally, it landed here with Greer Garson, who actually said that she was hoping that this would be her last heavy dramatic role that she would play. I think she was getting a little tired of this particular kind of story about like a noble woman. But once she did take it on, she devoted a lot of time to it. She read a whole bunch of books. She studied the life of Marie Curie and really just committed to it. And apparently, she said that this was the most she'd ever devoted to a project in terms of background stuff. So the question is, does all that hard work and dedication actually show on the screen. Terrence, thoughts on Greer Garson?
Um, I'd say it does.
Okay.
I think I have two slightly shady things to say before
Oh,
I get into
please
that.
go for it.
The second I saw her, I was like, oh, this is the Joan Crawford of Britain, of the
Huh?
UK. It's the
Yeah,
eyebrows. I don't know what it is
it's
about her face. I just think of Joan Crawford.
yep.
Um, and for what it's worth, I saw the Radioactive movie with Rosamund Pike.
Hmm, a few years
I,
ago. Yep.
I think I prefer this classic Hollywood rom-com slash drama to like the more modern version where you get the full details. I don't Something about this movie was very compelling, and even though you know it is light and fluffy in comparison to what her actual history is,
Hmm.
this movie is actually pretty good. And I do think that Greer does a pretty excellent job with this material. It's a very earnest performance, and I think she does a really good job of playing a woman of the time who is like devoted to her studies but also feels like the struggle of obligations, like especially in the scenes where it's like, she's graduated and she's expected to go back to help her father. And you like feel that this is a woman who like she's like, if I could think of any other way to stay, I would, but like unfortunately, maybe for and then she gets the opportunity to stay, and you see her dedication to the science, but you also see her dedication to, this romance. And I think it starts up really sweetly, and I like that she got to play that side of it without necessarily needing to sacrifice, the scientific exploration. Like the saying about women can have it all or can't have it all. It's like this
Hmm.
woman got to have it all, right? And so she gets to play
Yeah.
that. And so I really enjoyed her performance. I think she's got some really sort of very classic Hollywood, soft lighting,
Oh yeah.
single shots.
Hmm.
At times where I was like, I don't think we need this right now. But it's good. But I do think she played, I think she really played the character of Mary Curie that this movie needed her to play. She really played. Um, and there was definitely a moment in this, and I was like, definitely a moment in this where I was like, how didn't she win back to back? I mean, I
Wow.
know how she won back to back, and eventually, like, we'll cover the performance that actually won. But like, there was a
Yeah.
moment in this, I was like, oh, this is, we'd already had like one or two back to back winners at this point. I'm not sure about Best
Yeah.
Act.
Just Louise Reiner for
Yeah,
actress. Yeah.
so I guess they weren't in the mood to do that again, but it felt like a performance that could have won someone back to back Oscars. So yeah, I enjoyed her work in this a lot.
Wow. Okay. Well, this is going to be interesting
Oh
because
no, you didn't like her?
well, here's the thing. I have I have made it no secret that the appeal of Greer Garson can sometimes be lost on me.
Oh no.
I understand why she was popular at the time, but a lot of her performances just don't do much for me. I will say Mrs. Miniver was a high point, which we talked about last time. I'm glad if she was going to win an Oscar that she won for that. Here is back to square one.
Damn.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but we're going to have to disagree on this, and that's fine. And I don't entirely disagree with the idea that this version of Marie Curie's story, she is delivering on what it needs to be. I agree with that. I think she's fine here. I think she gives the performance that is required of her, and I'm not. Here's the thing. I think I'm sure it wasn't an easy task to take on a role like this, but I personally don't see the spark or the curiosity or anything that would suggest to me that she dedicated all this time to transforming into Marie Curie. Visually, she looks like she just stepped off the set of Mrs. Miniver. Um, in terms of body language, it's the same things that she's been doing in the past. And the only real notable aspect is how her character is a more logical thinker and is less emotional, which is something that an actress like Greer Garson can bring a certain noble stoicism to it and feels accurate to how the real Marie Curie probably was. So there is that. But unfortunately, I don't really feel connected to this character And I think the story is so focused on going from point A to point B that I feel like we don't get to really know her all that well, for me personally. Um,
Mm.
so I'm not a scientific minded person, so I can't say I related to like the science to her own personal journey and everything, but I don't know. I think visually they could have taken on more chances to really demonstrate things for the audience, but yeah, the story as we see it, as it's told in this way, really just didn't engage me. I think it's a very dull film, and the
Oh,
person at the center of it doesn't inspire much fascination. So that's my thought.
oh, what a. I mean, that's a fine take. Um, I don't know.
I just have to be honest. I'm
Maybe
sorry,
because
but
I was thinking about Radioactive. I was like, even though I can recognize how, like, I was like, why is there a rom like this? You think it's a drama,
mm,
and then you enter into this movie and you're in like a romantic comedy for a
I
significant
do
portion
think
of
they
it.
have a lot of good chemistry together. Obviously, they did a lot of films, her and Walter Pidgeon,
Yeah.
and you really feel that sense of history there. I think that aspect is the part I did really relate to a lot and enjoy from them. So,
And then everything after that you hated. Um, I
more or less.
I think no, I just really jived. I think that entry into the story really helped
Mm,
me get what she was going for performance wise. I have, and maybe it helps that I haven't seen Mrs. Miniver yet. I was hoping to watch it. This has
yeah.
just been a crazy time, so I haven't. But I'm going to watch it now because I think I'm a fan of Greer Garson. So I'm like the opposite of you.
Wow.
Um,
Okay. There are Greer Garson fans.
Yes, it's. I think what she does. I think I like that she just got to play. She didn't have to be like this swooning woman, because that's when the movie initially
That's
starts
true.
in a rom-commy way. I was like, please do not turn this uber scientific Nobel Prize winner into like some swooning damsel in distress for this man. And in
Right.
reality, he's more the swooning
Yeah, that's
person
true.
because he,
Hmm.
realizes that he loves her immediately and then he can't figure out a way to tell her. And the way he proposes to her is so silly.
That's funny.
But I
Yeah.
like that she got to maintain that character's sort of logical stance and got to play her that way. Loved the moment where where she's like, I can't give it up, right?
Yes. Right. Yeah.
um, I can see how you, as not a fan, would see that scene and be like, this is so stagey. And
Yeah.
so,
Eh,
but I bought it.
that's fine.
I did
No,
buy it.
that's fine.
But I'm glad we
I don't.
disagree on one. This is fun.
Yeah, that is fun. I will say probably her best moments overall are when she is in conversation with Pierre and she's like talking about something and she's really thinking through something and she's getting lost in thought and she sort of starts talking aimlessly like she's thinking out loud and it feels like it's more her working things out in her mind and
Hmm.
those are the moments where I really do get more of a feel for how this woman, this brilliant woman, worked through her process. Um, there's
Yeah.
that part where she's demonstrating the experiment and sort of talking it out, and she gets to a point where she gets stuck, and she's like, "I don't understand," in this very frustrated tone. I mean, these are small little moments, but I think she's at least getting at something for me that I don't always feel through some of the performance. So,
Okay.
yeah,
So there was something
she
positive.
I think yeah, she has her moments.
Yeah.
Where I don't know, it's just there's sometimes a little bit of a blandness to what Greer is doing that is I mean, in some ways it's good because it's she's not being super flashy with it. So she does have sometimes like a more natural feeling to her that can really work for a character. But sometimes it's just when the film is not all that interesting to me, I sort of am just like I wish there was some kind of spark.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I could see that. I actually think the blandness worked for me.
mm,
Because it felt like I said, she just got to play this sort of this woman, she didn't need to be Marie Curie in all caps, right? She just got to be this woman. So I think that stuff works for me. But I can definitely see how you
I
didn't
mean,
like
I,
it.
it feels like either you really do just have a vibe with this movie or you don't.
Yeah, I would agree. But especially because I was, like I said, watching it in conversation in my mind with Radioactive, and I'm like, okay, Radioactive is
Right.
like the
Yeah.
color, uber dramatic, modern take on this woman. You know, essentially all of her adult life. So like the affair and all in the X-ray, so all that stuff that they cut out of this movie that they didn't even get into in this movie. So it definitely feels like very sanitized, but I think in terms of for what it is, I appreciated her performance in that space of not needing to make it too much.
Well, I mean, she does have her bigger moments in the film, like when she's realized that she's discovered a new element, and
Hmm.
she's going on and on about what the scientists have discovered beforehand, and it's all kind of like science 101 for the audience, more so
Yeah.
than what she would actually be saying in that moment. Um, but then she finally talks about like, oh, I've discovered this new element, and I think she plays that scene pretty well in terms of really building it up to it for the maximum impact, even if again it's not as believable that she would talk to her also scientific husband in this very expository way.
Yeah.
um but
Yeah, I think this movie, like, to give credit to this film, um, explaining the science of what she's doing, like for 1943, that was like amazing. Like
no, that's true.
you could play that clip in like a science class now to like help people understand what she was actually doing. I think they did a really good job of that. And it's not like her experiments were super duper complicated just given the time that they were being done in, but like
Mm-hmm.
that's still very complicated science.
No, it's true. It's true. I get why they do that. um
Yeah.
it just felt like a little like not as realistic in that moment, but that's
Yes.
fine for what it is in 1943. I get it. But another interesting moment for her is when she freaks out because the radium is gone and that she feels like there's been 4 long years wasted.
Yeah.
I love those moments of her actually getting frustrated because she feels like she's on the brink of something, and yet these things keep happening where she's coming up just short of something.
Yeah, that's a good that might you it's funny because that was the scene that I was like, all right, let's wind it back down. So you like the scenes that I was like, because it just felt, and I got the frustration. I was like, oh, this
Yeah.
is a very classical Hollywood way of doing this scene.
Mm-hmm. No, it's true. I just like that she was giving me something. Sorry to be shady to Greer, but
No,
it
I mean,
is
I
what it
call her
is.
the
I have
Joan
to I have
Crawford
to
of the
live my truth.
UK, so
No, it's true. Yeah. um but oh, another good scene that I also took note of for her is when Pierre is telling a bedtime story to one of their kids, and it's about them. It's coded to
hmm
be about her, and she's reacting very stoically, and she wants to go to the party that they're supposed to go to despite being very unhappy with what's happened, because this is
yeah.
after she feels like she's wasted all those years. So that's a nice subtle moment for her, I will say. What else is there? Um, so later on, they've discovered the radium and they've won the Nobel Prize, and they're on vacation. And she's become very upset with him because he's talking about some kind of morbid thoughts,
Yeah.
and he's making her promise that if one of them dies unexpectedly, that the other one will carry on with the work. And we're seeing some real emotion from her in that moment, especially, which I think I found quite stirring. And she's also saying how she's just so thankful for him, and we have like the glistening eyes glamour close up moment.
Yeah. That's
So that's nice.
that could be an effective shot,
Yeah,
you know.
she really made it work. Um, but then later on, it's she's reacting to her husband's death in a way that you think that's gonna be like a big standout scene, but she definitely underplays it to the point of basically not reacting at all, which is right for the character. She's sort of just staring blankly, and even when people are talking to her, she's just like not present. until we get to that point where she sees this note that her husband left about wanting to get her earrings.
Yeah.
And then she finally breaks down, and it all just comes pouring out of her, all the emotion.
Yeah, that's a great. I definitely, when she didn't react, at first I was like, did my screen? I was like, did I press pause on accident? Because nothing was
Yeah,
happening. But I think
she's like a statue.
I think that was a strong choice actually for that
It
moment.
is.
Like
No, it is.
not everything, that she's not a woman that's gonna like break down wailing, but like, she's trying to process it. And I think the note, oh, that was such a great moment because it was like, now it was like all that the realization of what she no longer has
Yes.
is what hit her in that moment.
Yeah. And then in the end, we get this flash forward to 25 years later, and she's giving a speech at some sort of conference, and they've layered on the makeup,
Ooh.
probably too much makeup,
Well,
but
see, and this was the scene where I was like, oh, I could see somebody winning back to back.
Oh,
They
yeah,
gave
yeah,
her
yeah.
this epic monologue at the end of this movie.
That's true.
You know,
They do love a good speech. Yeah. But it's like this very poetic speech about science and how it's the path to a better world. Um, yeah, I think she definitely ends strong. It's the same thing that I said with Blossoms in the Dust, which I also wasn't crazy about, that she really at least knows how to land the plane in terms of giving a emotional conclusion to her character and her arc. So it's definitely one that got better as it went along, but still not one that I'm particularly crazy about.
mhm.
But I get, if you really lock into this character in this film, that it can be quite surprisingly effective. So there you
And
go.
you've got three more of her nominations to go.
I sure do. This is the halfway point. This is the top of the mountain, and I'm going down now.
Yeah.
So, yes, this is her fourth of seven. All right. Well, this was from the New York Times. They said Greer Garson and Walter Pidgeon are ideal in the leading roles. Ideal, that is, to the necessity of creating warm characters. Miss Garson, the invariable patrician, plays with that gentle, wistful grace, which makes her a glowing representation of feminine nobility and charm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's about right. It's kind of the same types of reviews that I've been reading for Mrs. Miniver and Blossoms in the Dust, but she had a type and she made it work.
Yeah.
More power to her.
And you know what I will say? There is power as an actor in realizing what you are really, really good at and
Yes.
doing that and maybe
Mm-hmm.
tweaking it a little here or there instead of going for big swings. Because, like, if you know that you suck at accents, then, like, don't do them. Just
Right.
in just like general. So, like, somebody like Greer Garson, it's like, okay, she's like, oh, I'm tired of playing noble women, and then she gets Madame Curie, and it's like, well, she was noble, but you got to do something a little different than like a Mrs. Miniver, you know.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's power in that. So if any actors
That's
listen to
true.
your podcast, that's my one note I have for them.
No, that's a very good point. Yeah. She knew her type and she made it work.
Yeah.
She worked within that type to do interesting things. Yeah. Well, let's get to our big winner, shall we? Jennifer Jones, The
Hmm.
Song of Bernadette. So, Jennifer Jones, she had actually acted in two films before this under her real name, Phyllis Isley, and then she was essentially transformed and reintroduced to the public as if she was a new actress. um, Given a new name, Jennifer Jones. All of this was under the guidance of David O. Selznick, and the two of them would actually marry later on. So this was one of those roles that was among the most sought after in Hollywood. Apparently, there were over 2,000 actresses that auditioned for the role of Bernadette.
Wow.
Um, but yeah, Jennifer Jones, I guess, had that kind of X Factor quality to her that they were looking for. And this was a very unique story, The Song of Bernadette. It's about a real life woman named Bernadette Soubirous, who was a French woman in the 1800s, and apparently she had experienced visions of the Virgin Mary. And then that story was loosely adapted into a novel, which was a big, big bestseller. And here's the adaptation of that novel. Um, so the film, it explores Bernadette having these visions at this local grotto and the community that forms around her. Some of them are skeptics, others are really believing in the power of what she's envisioned here, and they actually start to find themselves being healed of their various illnesses after there's like a discovery of a spring of holy water, essentially. So it follows her experience as this sort of local celebrity, I guess, and then later on her experience as a nun. Very long film, another long one. It's about 2.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about it. Let's thoughts on our big winner here, Jennifer Jones. What do you think?
Um, I get how she won.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think her role and her performance is so different from the other women in this category that it just stands out. You
Yes.
know, it stands out above the rest of them just by and it's not like she's, like leaps and bounds. It's like it's not necessarily, I would say, like an undeniable thing, but like the what she is doing in this movie is just so different from the other women that I could see. I was like, oh yeah, like I see how she won this.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's pretty dynamite in the movie, and I say dynamite even though her performance is really even.
Yeah.
And I think like that must be so hard for an actor to play. We look at these you know, we see actors who take big swings and we see actors that get modulation. And it's like she has to remain like convinced that she has seen Mary, convinced, stay in this sort of narrow lane. And she gets to, move about as she interacts with different people. But I was just so impressed with how even that performance is the entire time, because that's something really, really, really hard to do. Um,
Yeah.
I get how she, like I said, she, what, 25 when she won this? So,
Mm-hmm.
Oscar loves a really young woman.
I love an
Um,
ingenue. Mm-hmm.
and she fit the bill. Uh,
Yeah.
and I appreciated how much the story is centered around her sort of purity and her saintliness as the people around her act a fool. Like,
Yeah.
especially the men of the town, right?
Yep.
Nearly every man,
Mm-hmm.
with the exception of that one, I forget what his job was, but that one guy who is very clear is in love with her,
Mm-hmm.
which is what made her having to become a nun. Was that devastated me? I was like, oh no, because I thought they were gonna,
Yeah.
get like married, but like, yeah,
Yeah.
every man except for one in her life is just raggedy. Her father, the
Mm-hmm.
the governor, the mayor, the police chief, the other priests, and eventually they do come around. And so it's really interesting to see that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I appreciated this movie in terms of like being about religion, but allowing like the space for these characters to question.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I totally see how, you know, Jennifer is great in this movie. She's
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I watched this for the first time a few years ago for this show when we talked about this being the likely Best Picture runner-up to Casablanca this
it won
year.
more Oscars than Casablanca, which is a weird
It
footnote.
did. Yeah, 12 nominations. Like, it was huge. And I remember enjoying it. I remember enjoying her performance, but I didn't really remember that many individual scenes so much as like the overall experience and the tone and the sort of sincerity of the film and her performance. And honestly, now that I've watched it again, I think that's what I take away from this performance too, is that if you were to like pinpoint certain scenes, her performance might not feel that spectacular.
Hmm.
She has like that luminous quality and she does make you believe that she's seeing those visions, but you're right that there's not a whole lot of range here that she's asked to display. She's very resolute in what she saw and is just
Yeah,
maintaining that truth for 2.5 hours. And there's not a lot beyond that. So for a lot of the film, you could say, oh, well, I'm not that impressed by like a huge acting range here. But when I step back and look at the performance as a whole, it does really work
yeah,
because number one, I think the material is kind of limited, so there's not too much she can do about that lack of range. but also this is a woman who was apparently so convinced of what she saw that there was very little she could that could even change her mind. And she does convey that sense of certainty very well. And what I also think is interesting in a meta sort of way is that I've been looking through some Letterboxd reviews for this film, and it seems like people are either taken by this performance or they just do not get it. And it sort of mirrors like the central conflict of this film, where either you buy into what
true.
she's saying or you don't. Personally, I do think this is a very good performance. It's hard for me to get like super excited about it, but I still think she definitely excelled in this part because it does feel like it is this one frequency, but she does that one frequency very well, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
and I think, like I said, like, we talked about this power and figuring out what you do well. Like, the movie needs her to be on that one frequency the entire time.
Right.
Like, the weight of that and the conviction that you have to have as an actor to carry that through is what I think makes this a really strong performance. Like, you find out early on in the movie that she's like, maybe she has some struggles with learning,
Mm-hmm.
and so people sort of doubt her. So you're already on her side, right?
Yeah.
And you know that she's seeing what she's seeing because the movie shows you, um,
Yes.
in some very great visual effects for, uh, you know, ye olden times
Yeah.
of classic movie, cinema. But I think as she sort of bounces off the different characters and builds relationships with them, that's where I think that frequency really works because, like, like you said, like she believes so strongly in what she has seen. Why does she need to get loud or weepy
Yeah.
or whatever? Like, she has the conviction of what she saw, and so the other characters can be loud and crazy and then it's a great juxtaposition for her. But I can definitely see how people be like, oh, I don't get it, because she's in a category with a lot of loud people, um
Yes.
or people who are doing lots of loud things, and hers
Yeah.
isn't. But yeah, I really dug her performance in this movie, so I was a fan.
Yeah. I mean, like the rest of this competition is like almost all of them have some kind of emotional breakdown
Yeah.
or some or tears and or just like loud and speeches and everything, and she's just like very much on that same level through this whole thing, which there is like a quiet kind of power in that at the same time. um but the first moment that she has where she sees the Virgin Mary, even though she doesn't really seem to know like who it is at first,
Hmm.
um she still knows that she should listen, and that's where she's very luminous. I mean, quite literally, with this like blinding light on her face. Um,
Yeah.
and I imagine it's tough to really convey that without being kind of corny or just like going big with it, like with the huge wide eyes and everything. Um, but I think she ends up really kind of striking the right tone with it, where it's not exactly subtle, but it's not so over the top that you're like, wow, she's not in her right mind. Like, this is a crazy woman. Although I
Yeah.
gotta say this, I do have to. I wonder your thoughts on this. I think it's a big mistake that they actually show the Virgin Mary herself.
um
I Here's
yes.
what I will say.
You want us to be like the people around her.
Yes,
It's like the POV. It's like, whose POV is the story?
right. I think the glow on her face is enough, and that we as an audience can sort of imagine it, or we could just even interpret it as like her being wrapped up in her own mind, and maybe we don't believe that she's seeing something. But I feel like the fact
Hmm.
that we actually see her kind of feels like betraying the point of the whole film, which is the idea of
Yeah.
belief. And it's not like the film is told entirely from her perspective. Like, we have a lot of scenes that are just these men in rooms where she's not even there and they're talking about her. So I don't know. That kind of bothered me just on a filmmaking level, but
Hmm.
that doesn't have anything to do with her. Um, but yeah, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I could see that because and you get the title card at the beginning, that's
Yeah.
about, if you believe in God, you'll think it's true, and if you don't, you won't.
Right.
Uh, some it doesn't say that exactly. It says something to that
More
effect.
or less, that's what
Yeah,
it
more or
says. Yeah.
less. And so, you're sort of set on that path. But I do it would have been interesting to not have a C, and really get to stand with her and her conviction and everybody else's, sort of not feeling it.
Right, right. It's like not revealing the monster in a horror movie.
Yeah, but I think you know what I think there is a monster in this movie,
Mm,
and it is tuberculosis.
well, true.
In the sense of like people have it, and she's got there's something else going on, and so when it got to that point, I was like, wait a minute, what? And I was like, oh, let me look. Okay, now it there was like a interesting shaping there once you find out what's
Hmm.
sort of been going on with her all her life. They sort of play it as a moment to teach another character something, but I was like, oh, that would be
Yes.
really interesting if you knew, it like if you have cancer and like sort of the end is eventually going to be there.
Hmm.
What how you would act if you were presented with the Virgin Mary. Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
yeah, there is a monster hanging out. It just is not the main story.
that's true. That's very true. The other scene that I actually always think about when I think about this film is the one where she's attracted this huge crowd when she's seeing this vision, and the Virgin Mary like tells her to eat the flowers and like bathe in the spring.
Hmm.
So she just like eats a bunch of them, and there's no water around, so she digs into the mud and just like is lathering herself in it. I remember
Yeah.
talking about this on the Best Picture episode, and the score is like very angelic and sort of spiritual in this very evocative way. And I just want to see a cut of this film that does not have that score. And
Yeah.
it's just like this woman who is just like eating flowers and like bathing in mud, and like this whole crowd is watching her silently. Just saying.
Yeah,
I just think
the
it
mud
plays
thing,
very differently.
the mud thing was great, especially when they're taking her away, and she's like, "But I have to do this." But like, I
Yes.
have, and then later you find out that there actually is a spring where she was digging. It just
Hmm.
hadn't sprung yet.
Right. But I just love how the way she plays that scene, she really commits to that moment. And like, there's no self consciousness. It's just her doing what she's been told to do in this very matter of fact way.
Hmm.
And it's just what the scene needs. So I kind of love that moment. Um, but for a lot of the film, for the first 2 hours, it's this, local men in town who are deciding what to do about Bernadette. And I would argue that she does get a lot to do, but also at the same time doesn't, until the turning point of like one of the men played by Charles Bickford, who has had this sort of relationship with her and is telling her that she should join up with the convent. And she's really just like sort of shaken by this, and she's worried about her family, and she just wants a normal life. But then
Hmm.
she realizes she can't live a normal life, that she has this special gift and she needs to use it for some level of good. And then everything with the convent, I personally think, is even more interesting than the first 2 hours.
Yeah.
Especially the stuff with Gladys Cooper, who is this like former headmistress to Bernadette, and now she's like, I guess, Mother Superior or something. And she's always been sort of suspicious of her, and she's angry that she hasn't been blessed like Bernadette has. Lots of good material there, I think, could
Yeah.
be mined for some interesting conflict.
Yes, we love jealous nuns.
Yes.
We love people
It's
of the cloth that have been called to a higher purpose but still cannot overcome their humanity.
yes, it's very Charlotte Rampling and Benedetta.
Loved Benedetta. And
I mentioned
definitely,
this
yeah,
on
there's so many
Twitter.
shades of
This would
that.
be a good double feature.
It would actually.
Just
Um,
saying.
yeah, actually, let me write that down. I've been keeping a list of movies that people say would make good double features, so I'm gonna put that
Oh my god.
on the list.
Well, I mean, truly very different
Oh, it
feeling
already is on
films,
the
but
list. Never mind.
well, there you go.
Yeah, I
Okay.
added it in there.
Perfect. Um, yeah. So, as you were mentioning later on, we have probably her best moments where she has the tuberculosis,
Hmm.
but she doesn't want to drink the holy water, and she hasn't seen the Virgin Mary in a while, and she's in bed and she's sort of like speaking in these stops and starts, and she finally sees her again and she says she loves her. I think she really ends this movie really strong. I mean, this
Yeah.
is like the last 15 minutes or so are like, this is why you won this Oscar.
Yes. Yeah, she definitely that's where she get to do some of the more traditional stuff that you would think of a performance that wins an Oscar in a movie like
Yeah.
this, you know.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's still not strong because I do think it's really interesting to get to see her play like she has this spring that has proven to heal, and if
Mm-hmm.
she's not going to drink it, that's what
Right.
an interesting choice for this woman to make.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, and her, and I think, and I also think like her not seeing the virgin, like she gets to play this sort of like a little bit of doubt gets to creep into her mind, but not necessarily
Yes.
doubt about what she's seen, but just doubt about like what what is my purpose? Like, what am I if not also being able to see this being? Um,
Yes.
which is why, you know, when she gets to see her when she dies, is such a powerful moment.
It is. It really is. Um, this review from the New York Times said her large, sad eyes and soft face, her wistful mouth and luminous smile are a thoroughly appealing exterior for the innocence which shines from within, and her manner, both dignified and humble, modest yet confident, is a wonderful contrast to the shadings of lay and clerical personalities which confront her on all sides. So lots of glowing praise for Miss Jennifer Jones here. This was a real discovery moment. I think we can transfer into talking about the Oscars here and why she won this.
Hmm.
There was a huge campaign behind even presenting her as a new star. As I said, you know, that she had acted before, but it was very much sort of reinterpreted to be like, oh, this is this new exciting actress, to the extent that they barely allowed her to like go out in public or even give interviews and things like that, because it would risk like corrupting this image that people might have
Mm.
of, oh, look at this exciting new actress who nobody has ever seen before or knows anything about, and you can therefore like attach, like, you don't have baggage basically going into this movie at all because you don't know who she is.
Yeah, and that was probably smart because she's in, you know, like this might have been Ingrid's first, but like she was a known entity at that
Yeah.
point. She's in a, you know, she was up against a whole bunch of people who were already known. So I can see the discovery, you know, actually helping her in the race. It's like, wow, where did this person come from? Oh my God, isn't this performance so amazing?
Mm-hmm.
You know, in a movie we all love.
Yeah.
Um, you know, of course she is the best performer of the year.
Yep. So, I mean, there was a lot of heavy praise for this film. It was huge with the Catholic Church. Um,
Yeah.
and, you know, you could see why. And I think there was like that air of mystery around Jennifer Jones, like, oh, this is kind of an exciting person compared to these people that we've already known. Um, I do know just from reading from Inside Oscar that this is where things started to kick into a new gear in terms of campaigning at the Oscars and really,
Mm.
you know, putting out ads and stuff like that. Like MGM, I read they ran an ad in the trades for Madame Curie, which they hadn't even done for a movie for several years, and they were just like really highlighting the importance of the story and things like that. Um, so I think maybe Greer could have very easily contended for a possible back to back. But in terms of the Oscars themselves, Ingrid Bergman apparently went backstage to congratulate Jennifer. By the way, it was also Jennifer's 25th birthday that night, so very much like the belle of the ball
Yeah.
feeling for Jennifer. But she actually apologized to Ingrid Bergman for winning, but then Ingrid was like, "No, Jennifer, your Bernadette was better than my Maria." So very gracious. Um,
Which it was. So it was.
yeah, which she had a point.
Yes, it was.
But yeah, I think this is one of those years, just like last year with Greer Garson and Mrs. Miniver, where it's like there's one really, really compelling narrative here at the top where nobody else can really come close to what Jennifer Jones had in terms of narrative.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say. Um, let's get to some Twitter questions, shall we?
Fun.
This is from Will. Jean Arthur is great in this. However, she's great in everything. Why was this the only performance they chose to nominate? If you could pick just one performance of hers to nominate, what would you pick? Do you
Ooh,
have thoughts on this, Terrence?
what a question.
Yeah, a lot there.
Sometimes the Academy is dumb.
Often.
You know, it- sometimes the Academy is dumb. It's how Nicole Kidman's, if she wins another Oscar for playing another real life person, it's how we're gonna look, and we're gonna look at her career and be like, how does she win Oscars for playing two real life people when like her filmography is all about being like original and pushing the boundaries? It like
Yeah.
sometimes they just don't vibe with what you're doing, even in the movies that they like. And I think probably the story behind this helped her. That it's like she got George Stevens, who was a great director. She built this as a star vehicle for her. I could see
Yeah.
the story of it, and it also being a hit of the year, really helping out in that respect. Um, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is the one I would have nominated for. I don't know who I'm kicking out of that lineup, but I think that's the one that
Yeah.
I would have done.
So I guess would that be in supporting?
Yeah, because does that mean I have to take Vivian Lee's Oscar away if I give her that nomination? Are we just giving her a nomination or the win?
I think a nomination. Yeah.
Um, she can. I'll put her in supporting. I'll category
Yeah.
fraud.
Yeah, that's fine. I kick out Maria Ospinskaya from Love Affair and put in Jean Arthur, and
Yeah.
we're good to go. Um, yeah, but in terms of why this was the one performance, I think, right place, right time. I think her
Yeah.
profile was really continuing to rise, and with Talk of the Town the previous year, which the Academy really liked, maybe just felt like the right time to finally reward her. Plus, she really does, blend that comedy with the drama, and it's just
Hmm.
a good performance. If I were to pick one performance of hers, um, I mean, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington really is so perfect for her.
Yeah.
Another one would just be Talk of the Town, which I think she's better in than More the Merrier, really doing that screwball comedy thing even better, playing off Cary Grant and Ronald Coleman. So, yeah. I'd also highlight History is Made at Night, which is very underrated and was just added to the Criterion Collection. Very
Ah.
zany movie, but she's very good in it. This is from Fritz. Pretty much the same thing. Other Jean Arthur performances you would have nominated. See previous comments.
Yes.
And I would maybe even throw in Mr. Deeds Goes to Town.
Yeah.
So give her like 5 nominations. I don't know what that means for like those categories in terms of kicking people out, but I can make
Yeah.
room. Also from Fritz. Yes, Ingrid Bergman has Casablanca, but doesn't the nomination for Bells make more sense in the eyes of the Academy?
No.
Wow, okay.
This is a good time to talk. It's just Casablanca won Best Picture
Yes, it did.
and director
Mm-hmm.
and screenplay.
Mm-hmm.
So they loved the movie. Just like the so how was it like a category situation? They couldn't figure out whether she was supporting or lead.
Maybe.
It's so weird to me to see, Humphrey got nominated and so did Claude Rains.
Right.
So they vibed with the acting. I don't,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why For Whom the Bell Tolls is the nomination for her acting wise rather than Casablanca. Like maybe just because that character in For Whom the Bell Tolls is a little more in the Academy wheelhouse for good and for better and worse. But yeah, I don't get it. Actually,
Yeah. I've been trying to think about why. I don't think there's an easy answer to it. Zoe G also asked this question: why was Ingrid Bergman not nominated for Casablanca? I think as much as it's sort of dissonant to say this, I think For Whom the Bell Tolls was seen as the more prestigious film between the two of them. And like, yes, Casablanca is winning Best Picture, but I feel like For Whom the Bell Tolls also had a lot of buzz heading into it, and she's really transforming for that part. So I think
hmm
that might be part of it, but otherwise, no idea.
yeah, there's
That's
definitely
all I got.
definitely something to the D glam, even though
Yeah.
I still think she's pretty glam in For Whom the Bell Tolls, but there's definitely something to like
Right.
the difficulty of that character, right? Like the character, in their minds is like, oh, look at this woman playing this woman who watched her family die and was raped and has been living this rough and tumble life, and she had to cut her hair, and now she's falling in
Yes.
love with this superstar that we like, even though they also come from it's weird. Would I swap these nominations? Yes, but
Yeah.
I guess I can see from that logic how she got nominated for Whom the Bell Tolls.
Right. This is another one from Fritz. Why was distinctively British Greer Garson so often cast as other nationalities?
You know what I appreciated in this movie,
Hmm?
and something that I appreciated in like Chernobyl,
Mm-hmm.
letting people use their natural accent is smart. You just need
Yeah.
just tell like you say so and so is from such a place, and we just need to go with that. Like, if she would have tried to do a Polish, could she have done it? Maybe, I don't know. She's Oscar-winning actor, so she has some
Yeah.
skill. But yeah, I think in those days and sort of what people are coming around to now, it's like you don't necessarily need somebody to speak in the accent of the character that they're portraying if it is going
Right.
to take away from the movie. So I think that's probably why they were like, we want a big star who can be, in the Academy Award conversation. So we're going to pick this British woman, and we're just never going to have her, do the accent because you just know that the performance is more important than the voice.
Right. That's a very good point. Yeah. And I think people would feel more wanting it to be more realistic in the decades to come, but at this time, maybe not so much.
Yeah, I mean, her co-star isn't even speaking in a
Mm.
British accent,
Yeah. True.
So they were just like, everybody come to the table with what you got.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in terms of like how she was always cast in these parts of other nationalities, I think another thing is just she was like the go-to prestige actress of this
Hmm.
time.
Yeah,
So she was always like at the top of the list, no matter what part of the world that the character was from. It was always like, oh, gotta go to Greer.
yeah.
Yeah. Andrew Carden said, speaking to some snubs here, did Betty Davis deserve a nomination for Watch on the Rhine? And do you think she was close to making the cut?
If I look at, because I just pulled up the list of the nominees,
Mm-hmm.
it's actually kind of odd that she's not in the lineup,
Yeah, because
given
you
the,
look at the other nominations for Watch on the
yeah,
Rhine.
yeah, it won actor, you
Yeah,
know, and it's nominated a whole bunch of other places, so it is kind of weird that she's not in there. And they like her, you know.
they love her.
So, I mean, I definitely, there's two people on in this lineup I would kick out in favor of that performance. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I don't know why she didn't.
Yeah, I mean, just from my own memory of Watch on the Rhine, I do think it's a little more of a secondary role that she has in the film. It's
Yeah,
not quite like the dominating, here I am, Betty Davis, like sort of performance. But I imagine she came very close considering who she is and how much they like the film. But I don't know. I guess sometimes the part just isn't quite there.
yeah, she had
I don't
one,
know.
two, three, four, five, six,
Yep.
7 nominations at this point. Maybe they were
Yeah.
tired and they were like, we
Yeah.
need to give ourselves a break.
Let's cool our jets. We don't
Yeah,
need to give her a sixth in a row.
yeah, and
Yeah,
it would have been seven because she got nominated the year after.
exactly.
Yeah, maybe they were just like, we need a break.
Yeah. We'll let you sit this one out, Betty.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, Christoph N literally asked the same kind of question, which is why did she miss out when Paul Lucas won Best Actor for it? And that she would have eventually had a 7-year streak if she'd gotten in. Yeah, I just think the part wasn't strong enough and they wanted a
yeah.
break. GTA James said, how close do you think Teresa Wright may have been to scoring a nomination for Shadow of a Doubt?
Um,
Well, she was
hmm,
definitely on a roll. She had
yeah.
3 nominations already. Um,
I don't.
although I'm always uncertain when it comes to Alfred Hitchcock and female leads outside of Joan Fontaine.
Yeah, his how many actors did Alfred Hitchcock actually guide to a nomination?
Actors in general, regardless of gender. I'm not sure, but with women, it's like not very many.
Yeah, I think,
It's just Joan Fontaine in lead.
yeah, I don't know if we're looking at it like that, that how close she actually was. It only got one nomination. It got nominated for original motion picture
Yeah,
story.
right.
Um,
So it was on their radar at least.
yeah, definitely
So
on the radar, but yeah, Alfred, other than Joan and Laurence Olivier, it's thin.
yeah,
Thin with these
and
actors.
Janet Leigh a little later on
Yeah.
with Psycho, but yeah. K Flea 208 said, with the de Havilland Law lawsuit starting this year, do you think this lawsuit had any effect on the race or who got nominated?
So this
Um,
was Olivia de Havilland basically saying, "I want out of my contract. I want to be able to do movies with other
yes.
people." Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes. Just for some background for the listeners if they don't know. So, since about the 20s, the contracts that actors signed were usually written in such a way that whenever an actor wasn't working, their contract would be suspended, essentially, which means they could be held for even longer than what the contract states. And like it says, since no artist could be working every single day, this interpretation meant that 2 or later 7 years of actual service would be spread over a much longer calendar period,
Mm.
thus extending the time during which the studio system had complete control over a young artist's career. So, what Olivia de Havilland did was that she was frustrated with getting these ingenue roles and filed the lawsuit against Warner Brothers, and she won, which allowed these contracts to mean like 7 calendar years rather than 7 years spread out over however long, which really granted a lot more freedom for actors.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as far as how this affected the race, probably not enough, like not yet, because it just happened. But certainly in the years to come, like I think a lot of actors were free to take on more interesting roles. And there's
Yeah.
really no greater example than Olivia herself with like the heiress and the snake pit and all kinds of stuff.
The Era, such a good movie.
Mm.
Yeah, I would agree because the decision came down in November of 1943, so I don't necessarily
Yep.
know if that, and then they appealed it, and then it was, yeah, I don't necessarily know if that affected this particular race. All of these women were already under contract,
Yeah.
but I'm sure as you get into the 50s and you start looking at the parts that women got, if there's a definite change.
This is from Stanny Homey. This is the last question, and I think is very appropriate that we end here. Why wasn't Lassie nominated this year? Love this question. Referring to Lassie the dog of Lassie Come Home, which was released this year.
Did that? Wow.
Yeah.
That really was 43.
Yeah.
Um, this is good because I went to like a Christian school, so I watched Lassie when I was there. I went to Christian grade school,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know why I didn't think about 1943. Wow, it did come out this year. Um,
Yep.
why wasn't Lassie nominated? Um,
Yeah.
that's a good question because it's not as good as Babe.
Wow. Well, there you go.
I mean, I guess, yeah, it's not as good as Babe. It's not as good as Babe.
I mean, here's the thing. With this Academy that was rumored to have voted for Rin Tin Tin at the first Oscars,
Yeah.
I'd say it's not outside the realm of possibility that Lassie was a contender. Yeah. Great questions once again, people. um,
That was a great.
yes.
I saw this movie so long ago that I don't know why. The fact that it was made.
Yeah. It's wild, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's get to our final segment here where we will give our verdict on who we think was the runner up to Jennifer Jones. Do you have a thought? Who do you think was the runner up?
I had a thought coming into this,
Uh-oh.
and then
Did it change?
after we have had the discussion, I feel like I have another thought.
Oh, okay.
My head is telling me that it was Greer Garson.
Okay.
In the middle of 50 million nominations in a row, having just won, fresh on the voters' minds, playing a real person, not uber glamorous, but not, super de-glam, great Oscar clips. But I think after our discussion, you know who I think it really was? Joan Fontaine.
Wow. Go on.
I because I think in 1943 they wouldn't have been so repulsed by the initial idea like we were with the
True.
start of it. So there wasn't necessarily a hurdle for them to get over, and they were not thinking of Joan Fontaine as like this woman, which is why they nominated her again. And I do think that she, of these nominees, I mean Jennifer has the strongest performance, but I think her performance is the second strongest in this category. So I think
Yeah.
you have convinced me,
Oh,
to go with Joan Fontaine as number two.
wow. That's that's interesting. I mean, I could definitely see it, especially because it's so different from what she had shown before, which they tend to
The
like.
only thing that is against her, I think she's the only nominee from the film in the
Yes, correct.
so that
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. My head
Uh,
is telling me Greer, but I really feel like it was.
yeah, that's the thing is that the other four nominees are, I believe, all of them in Best Picture nominees too.
They are.
So, but look, there's been cases like there Juliette Moore and Still Alice, like Charlize Theron and Monster, like it can happen. Um, but I will say something interesting in my reading of what I've seen here is that Ingrid Bergman might have actually been the runner-up.
Mm,
Go with me on this. I think she was very much helped by also being in Casablanca, but it also, from what I understand, was sort of set up as a race between two new ingenue types
yeah.
here. Both of them would become big Academy favorites here. Greer and Joan were already rewarded recently. I could definitely see Greer. I could see Joan also because of how different that role is, but I'm not sure with the lack of other nominations. The only one I don't think it was is Jean Arthur, unfortunately.
Yeah. I would agree.
And it pains me to say that, but
Poor Jane.
based on the reputation, I sort of feel like the nomination was the reward. Yeah, I mean, this is a really tough call between the other three, though.
Yeah, I can't even give you a solid pick of the two because like
I know it's tough.
I can absolutely see Ingrid Bergman being number two
Yeah,
because, like wasn't that the top grossing movie of the second highest grossing movie of the year?
yeah. Hmm.
Um, and Jennifer Jones is right there just behind her. Um,
Right,
yeah,
right.
so maybe it was Ingrid. Dang.
Yeah, and also Ingrid would get a win the very next year. So they were sort of getting ready to reward her.
Yeah.
I don't know
Well,
if that impact.
much better.
Oh, yes. Yes. So I'm going to definitely use my head here and guess Ingrid Bergman just based on what I've read, even if, like, looking at the performances, it doesn't really feel
Yeah.
like it should be in that position. So that's why I'm like, maybe it could have just been Greer all along or Joan. So very tough. But, Terrence, final question. Who would you have voted for from this lineup?
Uh, Jennifer Jones.
Okay. You
Yeah.
would have gone along with the wave of Jennifer Jones support.
Yeah,
Yes.
I absolutely would have. I just think about this movie and the other things that it won, and I'm like, I don't know. Uh, like the score, Alfred is,
Yeah.
but why? But yeah, Jennifer, it just, the commitment to that part, the actual performance, she's the standout among the group for sure.
Okay. Very good. I would vote for Jean Arthur.
Of course.
Because I just have to be true to myself and
Yeah.
just give her the one win that I could have given her to represent the greatness of her work. I think it's a very good performance, regardless of the weirdness of the ending. And I just want to give her a win, period. But Jennifer Jones is a very close runner up for me. So I
Hmm.
don't blame you at all for voting for her. And
Yeah.
Joan Fontaine comes close too. So
Yeah.
that's a solid top three.
Yeah, Joan probably would be my number two, but Jennifer,
Nice.
she's just the best of the bunch.
Yeah, I get that. And a lot of people agreed with you. So you're on the right side of history, I
Yes.
guess. All right. Well, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Terrence. We really got into a lot here. So thank you so much for devoting all this time.
Yeah, thank you. It was great getting to watch these movies, and get to have this fun discussion.
Yes. Where can people find more of you on the internet?
You can find my work at lenoirauteur.net. That's LENOIRAUTEUR.net. And then I'm on Twitter at Terence B. Johnson.
Yes, very good. And thank you all for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson, and the podcast is at Oscar Runner Up on Twitter, Instagram at And the Runner Up Is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you like what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/And the Runner Up Is, where you can hear a whole bunch of bonus episodes. And next week, we'll be talking about the 1944 Best Actress race. The nominees there were Ingrid Bergman for Gaslight, Claudette Colbert for Since You Went Away, Betty Davis for Mr. Skeffington, Greer Garson for Mrs. Parkington, and Barbara Stanwyck for Double Indemnity, with the winner being Ingrid Bergman. Very, very excited for that. So that's what to watch before next week. Thanks again, Terence.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And with that, I will bid you all adieu.